Good morning, YouTubers. It's rarely that I put two stories together, one after the other, but I'm doing so because of a conversation I had with Happy-Go-Lucky Piper, and I mentioned that I would do a story last night about a pipe, and he said he'd look forward to reading it today, or hearing it today, so I'm going to post it today. I'm smoking my naked bones, which is coloured up very well. In it, I've got Boswell Northwood, which was a present from Izzy, and is very, very nice. It's not often Americans can get English blends just the way I like them, but this isn't bad. And I'm drinking coffee. This story is called The Travelling Pipe, and I wrote it whilst I was drinking coffee earlier on this morning. So I hope you're sitting comfortably. Then I'll begin. The old man called Grandad lived next door to us, and he'd often be seen sat upon his porch smoking his pipe. He'd spent most of his life as a sailor, and now in old age he'd retired and spent his time sat smoking a pipe and telling tales of the sea to anyone who would listen. Many times you'd see him surrounded by children who were listening enthralled to his stories of rounding the Horn and of the roaring 40s and of the godless 50s. As I got older, I spent more and more time with him. In fact, he taught me to smoke, and to smoke a pipe properly. He taught me first how to load the pipe, how to tamp it, and how to avoid tongue burn, and all the little techniques that pipe smokers learn. There was one pipe I never saw him smoke. It was always there beside him, but he never seemed to light it up. And one day I asked him about that pipe, and he said it was his travelling pipe. So I assumed that it was the pipe he'd had and used when he was at sea. At first my parents were worried. About the effect that the old man was having on my life. I think they feared that I would run away to sea. But they soon realised that he was a very good influence upon me. He was always there when I needed him. He helped with my schoolwork, and if I had a problem, he was very helpful. When I left school, I would spend many an evening after work smoking and talking with him. It was as if our love of the pipe had drawn us together. As time passed, I was sad to see how age was affecting him. He'd had a hard life, and the aches and pains he suffered were beginning to get him down, and he found it more difficult to get around. One day when I came home, I noticed he wasn't sat in his old rocking chair on the porch. My mother explained that he was very ill and had been taken to the Shriners Hospital for treatment. I quickly ate my tea and went to visit him. He looked pale, waxy, and weak, and it was clear that his life was drawing to a close. As I sat by his bed, he reached out his hand and held mine. He told me he'd left a little something for me, if anything happened to him. I, in turn, assured him that he would soon be home, and we would soon be sharing a pipe together. But it wasn't to be. Shortly after my visit, his lungs filled with fluid, and he passed away. He had no relatives, and he'd asked an old seaman friend to act as his executor. Sorry. A few weeks later, his friend came to see me and told me that I'd been left the house and a large sum of money. There was also mention of pipes and tobacco. They too had been left to me, and he left me a little note saying, "Take care when I smoke the travelling pipe, and only to do so when I was alone and thinking of him." Just have a little light. Shortly after the funeral, I moved next door and began to make his house my home. I kept some of his furniture and possessions. Other things I didn't want, I sold or gave away. Soon I had the house just as I wanted it. It was the most comfortable home I'd ever had. And oft times when I smoked a pipe, I could feel his presence with me. So far, I hadn't smoked his travelling pipe. Then, one summer's day, when I was sat alone on the porch, thinking of the many times we'd been together, I reached out and filled it with his favourite dark twist, tobacco. As I lit it and began to gently puff upon it, something magical seemed to happen. He had talked and talked about the many ports he'd visited, and I began to think about the day he'd told me about the port of St. Bernardine in the Pacific Ocean. As I remembered what he said, the port seemed to become real to me, and I found myself standing outside the Captain Morgan Inn. Slowly, I pushed open the door and went in. The inn was packed with sailors who were dressed in Victorian clothes. I went to the bar and ordered a glass of rum. As I turned to look around me, I heard a voice calling me over to a group in the corner, and they asked me to pull up a bollard and join them for a pipe. Someone passed me a plug of tobacco, and we spent many hours talking about the sea and seamanship. They swapped tales about life at sea and how she was a cruel mistress, and yet it was clear that not one of them would have it any different. As the evening wore on, people began to drift away, and I made my goodbye, promising to come back again, and left them in high spirits. As I stepped outside the door, I found myself back on the porch, sat in my rocking chair. I was convinced that I'd been dreaming until I reached in my pocket and found a small piece of the plugged tobacco that had been handed to me during the evening. I'd been used to contemplating and meditating while smoking a pipe, but never had that contemplation been so real as it was that night. Now I know just what the travelling pipe was capable of, and I visited many places as I smoked it. I often examined the pipe to try and find out more about it, but to all intents and purposes it was a plain briar pipe. I never solved the mystery of the travelling pipe. And now, as I sit in my chair, an old man, spending the last years of his life, I've decided to leave the pipe and the house and my money to the young man next door who comes and sits with me as we smoke together and we spend time discussing the things that surround us. I don't smoke the travelling pipe very often now. I'd like to, but it seems no longer for me. I sit and remember. I tell tales of the sea, the roaring 40s and the godless 50s, and my rounding the horn. And to all intents and purposes, I'm an old sea dog who's come ashore for the last time. I wonder if that old man so many years ago really had been a sailor. Or was he like me, the travelling pipe man, experiencing more in a pack of tobacco than I could possibly have experienced in many lifetimes? Sorry, I won't be a moment. Well, I might. I hope you like that. It's something that I wanted to write for a time. Something about a pipe I wanted to write. And as usual, when I sit down to write, it just flows. But anyway, I've got one or two shout-outs that I want to do. I won't be a moment. Let me just find them. They're buried somewhere under me story. Right. I'll put the names down in the bucket as usual. The first is Florida Piper, and then Traveller Mike, and Preep for my life. I won't spell that out for you. Prep for my life. But you'll need to look at it because it's spelt with capitals and small lowercase and with also numbers. But give them a look, especially the Traveller Mike, and they're new people, and they need the encouragement. One of them's not posting yet, but I hope that eventually he will, and that they'll all become members of the YTPC and share in our love and our affection for each other and our love of the pipe and tobacco. Well, bless you, my friends. May God's blessing pour down upon you, and may you enjoy life to the full.